The moment the room went quiet, I knew exactly what was coming. My mother-in-law had been holding that smile for 3 hours, the polished one she saves for company, the one that never quite reaches her eyes. She was standing at the head of the long dining table, champagne flute in hand, and she looked right at me when she said it. Let's be honest, some of us were built for this family, and some of us just married into it. Everyone laughed. My husband's aunt dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin and nodded like she'd just heard scripture. My brother-in-law raised his glass. Even my husband, the man I'd spent 6 years building a life with, looked down at his plate and said nothing. I didn't say anything either. I just picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and started doing the math in my head. Because I always do the math. It's what I'm good at. And what I had calculated, sitting at that table, surrounded by people who had just laughed at me, was this. In the past 4 years, I had quietly put $211,000 into keeping that family afloat, and not a single person in that room had ever said thank you. Let me back up. My name is Rachel, and when I married into the Harmon family, I understood what I was getting into, or I thought I did. My husband, Daniel, was the second of 3 kids. His older brother, Marcus, was the one the family talked about at every holiday. The business idea guy, the charming one, the son who was always 6 months away from something big. His younger sister, Priya, was still in school when we met, working toward a graduate degree in art history that everyone agreed was very impressive and no one talked about in practical terms. And then there was my mother-in-law, Diane. She ran the family like a corporation, where she was both CEO and majority shareholder, and the unspoken rule was that her approval had to be earned daily and could be revoked without notice. I was a financial analyst, had been since I was 24, when I graduated early and took a job at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte. I was good at it. Not in a showy way, in the way that means you're the person people call when the numbers stop making sense. By the time Daniel and I got married, I was pulling a solid salary, I had savings, and I had a clear picture of where I was going. What I didn't have was a clear picture of what I was walking into. It started small. The first ask came 6 months after the wedding. Marcus had a business idea, a small event rental company, tents and chairs and linens, the kind of thing that could work if managed well. He needed a bridge loan to cover the initial equipment purchase because the bank wanted collateral he didn't have yet. Diane called it a family investment opportunity. Daniel presented it to me over dinner, and I could see in his face that he'd already said yes on my behalf. I agreed. $40,000, structured as a loan, terms written on a napkin that I later typed up and emailed to both Diane and Marcus so there would be a paper trail. They found that very funny. Marcus said, "You're such an analyst, Rachel." Diane said, "We're family, sweetheart. We don't need contracts." I kept the email anyway. The second ask came 11 months later. The event rental company had equipment but no bookings because Marcus had not actually done any marketing. He needed 6 months of runway to build the brand. Diane said the family believed in him. Daniel said it would be a shame to let the initial investment go to waste. I transferred $22,000 and updated my spreadsheet. Yes, I kept a spreadsheet. I want you to understand something, because I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, why did you keep doing it? And it's a fair question. The honest answer is that when you love someone, and I genuinely loved Daniel in those years, you absorb their family the way you absorb everything else about them. Their habits, their history, their blind spots. The Harmon family operated on the assumption that money within the family was communal in times of need, and that anyone who questioned that was selfish. I didn't want to be the outsider who broke the system, so I kept participating in the system. I kept detailed records though. That part was just instinct. Over the next 3 years, it kept coming. Sometimes it was Diane, the roof on the house she owned outright needed replacing, and the insurance claim was delayed. Sometimes it was Priya's tuition gap when her fellowship didn't renew. Once it was a car for Marcus because his had been repossessed, though no one used that word. They said it had broken down beyond repair. I paid for a rental while he sorted himself out. I paid for 3 months of that rental. I never paid in cash. Everything went through wire transfer or check, so I had documentation. I told myself this was just how I operated, that it didn't mean I was expecting to be paid back, that I was doing it from a place of love. But somewhere around year 3, I started to notice something. When things were going well for the Harmons, when Marcus landed a contract, or Priya got a publication credit, or Diane hosted a successful dinner party, no one called me to share it. I heard about it secondhand, from Daniel, usually days later. But when something went wrong, my phone rang within the hour. I was the solution. I was never part of the story. That distinction started to matter to me more than I let on. The dinner where everything broke was a Saturday in October. Diane had organized a celebration. Marcus had finally, after 4 years, landed a real anchor client for the rental business. A corporate account. Steady revenue. The family was treating it like a moon landing. She'd reserved a private room at a restaurant in Raleigh, 14 people, a set menu, the whole production. I'd had a long week. I'd closed a complicated portfolio review, and I was tired in the specific way that comes from carrying more than your share for too long. But I put on a dress and I went, because Daniel asked me to, and because I still, even then, wanted to be part of things. The dinner was fine until the toast started. Diane went first. She talked about Marcus's vision, his persistence, his refusal to give up. She talked about how the family had rallied around him. She talked about Daniel's emotional support. She talked about Priya driving 3 hours to help set up for a client event once. She went around the table, naming each person and what they had contributed to Marcus's journey. She did not say my name. Not once. I sat there, and I counted the words she said. I couldn't help it, and my name was not among them. 4 minutes of tribute, and I was furniture. Then Marcus stood up. He was glowing, genuinely happy. And I didn't begrudge him that. He thanked his mom. He thanked Daniel. He thanked his whole support system. He made a joke about the rough early days. He said, "We almost didn't make it, you all know that, but this family doesn't quit." He looked right at me when he said this family, and then his eyes moved on. That was when Diane added her coda. She set down her champagne and said, in that warm, carrying voice she uses when she wants everyone to hear but wants to seem like she's just talking, "And I want to say the people who were really there for Marcus were the ones who showed up. Not the ones who just write a check and think that makes them family." The table went soft. Some people smiled uncertainly. A few people nodded. I felt Daniel's hand cover mine under the table. I didn't know if it was comfort or a request for silence. I chose silence. I finished my dinner. I smiled when smiled at. I drove home without saying a word. But here's what I did that night, when Daniel was asleep, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I opened the spreadsheet. I had kept it current the entire time, every transfer, every date, every stated purpose, every follow-up. I had the original email to Diane and Marcus about the first loan. I had the wire confirmations. I had the text messages where Daniel relayed the requests, and I confirmed the amounts. I had everything. I totaled the columns for the first time with fresh eyes, the way I would if a client had handed me this file. $211,400. 4 years and 2 months. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I called my friend Joanna, who is a CPA and who had been quietly worried about me for 2 years. She picked up on the second ring even though it was close to midnight, because she's that kind of friend. I read her the number. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Rachel, what do you want to do?" It was the right question. Not what should you do. Not what are you going to do, what do you want to do? I told her I wanted the truth on the record. Not revenge, not a fight, just I wanted it documented. I wanted it to exist somewhere outside my own head that I had done this, that it had happened, that it was real. Joanna said, "Then let's make it real." I spent the next 2 weeks organizing the file. I wasn't in a hurry. I pulled every transaction record and cross-referenced it against my bank statements. I wrote a clean, factual summary document. No emotion, no editorializing, just dates, amounts, stated purposes, and transfer confirmations. The kind of document I'd prepare for a client audit. 17 pages. On page 1 was a simple table. 4 years. 14 separate transfers. One total. I sent it on a Tuesday morning. Not to Daniel, first, I know that surprises you, but stay with me. I sent it to Diane directly, with one line in the email. I wanted to make sure this was on record before our next family conversation. These are the transfers I've made to support various family needs over the past 4 years. I have documentation for each one. I CC'd Marcus. I CC'd Priya. I did not CC Daniel, but I did leave my laptop open on the kitchen counter with the sent folder visible, because I'm not a person who hides things. I just choose my timing. Then, I went to work. My phone started ringing at 10:17 a.m. The first call was from Diane. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was measured and cool, the voice she uses when she's deciding which angle to take. She said she'd received my email and she thought we should talk, that she was sure there had been some misunderstanding about the nature of family support. Marcus called next. He was less measured. His voicemail was 4 minutes long and covered several positions simultaneously: that the money had been loans he'd always intended to repay, that he'd never been given formal repayment terms, that I'd offered the support freely, and that he felt blindsided and honestly a little hurt that I would do something like this. He used the word transactional twice, like it was an accusation. I saved both voicemails. Priya sent a text that said, "I didn't know the full amount. I'm sorry, Rachel. That was the one that actually got to me. I had to set my phone down for a minute." Daniel called at 11:45. I answered. He was quiet for a moment after I said hello. Then he said, "I saw the email." I said, "I know." He said, "Why didn't you tell me first?" And I said, "Daniel, you were there at that dinner. You heard what your mother said. You held my hand. When were you going to tell her first?" He didn't have an answer for that. I want to be fair to Daniel because the truth is complicated. He wasn't cruel, not the way Diane could be, not with that practiced social precision. He was conflict avoidant in the deep, bone-level way that some people are when they've grown up in a house where keeping the peace meant survival. He loved me. I believe that. But he had never, in 6 years, stood between me and his family when it mattered. And I had carried that weight the same way I'd carried the financial one, quietly, with documentation, telling myself it was fine. It wasn't fine. That afternoon, Diane called Daniel. I don't know exactly what was said because I wasn't in the room, but I could hear the register of his voice, the careful, placating cadence he uses when he's trying to smooth something over without actually resolving it. Afterward, he came to find me in the home office, and he stood in the doorway and said, "She wants to have a conversation. As a family." She says the document is misleading. I looked up from my monitor, and I asked him what part of it was misleading. He said, "She says the way it's framed makes it look like you were expecting repayment when everyone understood it was support." I said, "The first $40,000 was explicitly a loan. She has the email." He said, "She says the email doesn't reflect the spirit of the conversation." I said, "Daniel, what do you think?" He sat down. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said something I hadn't expected. He said, "I think I let you carry things I should have shared. I think I didn't protect you. And I think I owe you a real conversation, not a family mediation session." That was the moment I knew we might actually be okay. Not immediately, not without a lot of work, but that he could see it. That mattered. The family conversation happened the following Sunday. Diane had framed it as clearing the air. She had clearly prepared, because she arrived with her own narrative, already polished. She started by acknowledging her word that I had contributed financially to the family, and that she appreciated it, but that my document had created a tense atmosphere by assigning dollar values to what had been expressions of love. I let her finish. Then, I opened my laptop. I said, "I want to show you something." I pulled up the document and I went through it, line by line, not angrily, in the same voice I use when I'm presenting a portfolio review to a client who doesn't want to hear what the numbers say. The first $40,000. Here is the email thread where Marcus confirmed the loan and agreed to repayment terms. The second transfer. Here is the text exchange where Daniel relayed the request and I confirmed the amount the same day. The car rental. Here is the Venmo record. Page by page, date by date. Diane tried twice to redirect, once to talk about family culture, and once to suggest that I had chosen to help and therefore couldn't now frame it as an obligation. I acknowledged both points without abandoning mine. I said, "You're right that I chose to help. I want to understand why you told a room full of people that writing a check doesn't make someone family." That landed. She didn't answer it. She looked at Marcus, who looked at his hands. Daniel, sitting next to me, did not look away. Marcus said, "Eventually, I didn't know Mom was going to say that." I said, "I know. I'm not asking you to apologize for her. I'm asking all of you to acknowledge what's in that document." Priya said, "I acknowledge it." Diane sat with it for a long time. And then she said something I will probably think about for the rest of my life. She said, "I didn't realize how much it was. Not I'm sorry. Not you deserved better. Just she didn't realize." And honestly, that was more revealing than any apology would have been, because it confirmed what I'd suspected for 4 years. She hadn't thought of me as someone worth keeping track of. The money flowed in, the family kept going, and I was just infrastructure. Invisible load-bearing infrastructure. I said, "I know you didn't. That's the problem." I closed the laptop. A few things happened in the months after that. Daniel and I started seeing a couples therapist. His suggestion, which surprised me, and also told me everything I needed to know about whether he was serious. Marcus set up a repayment plan for the original $40,000. It took some back and forth, and Joanna helped me structure it properly, but it exists now, in writing, with signatures. The remaining transfers I let go, not because I don't think they mattered, but because I decided that what I needed wasn't the money back. What I needed was to be seen clearly, and I had done that. Diane and I are not warm. We're not going to be, I don't think, and I've made my peace with that. She sends birthday texts, and I respond politely, and we coexist at holidays with the specific civility of two people who understand each other's limits. What changed is that she never again, in any room I am in, makes a comment about who belongs in this family. Because she knows I'll open my laptop. The last thing I want to say is this, and I'm saying it directly to whoever is sitting there right now, recognizing themselves in this. You are allowed to help people you love. You are allowed to give generously. You are allowed to be the person who shows up. But you are also allowed to keep records. You are allowed to know the full picture. You are allowed, when someone tells a room full of people that writing a check doesn't make you family, to quietly and thoroughly prove that you know exactly what you've given, and to whom, and when, and why. Documentation isn't a threat, it's just the truth, organized. And the truth doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. Have you ever been the invisible one in a room you helped build? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story sat with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today. I'll see you in the next one.